Oh,
yes. So you get to see what you look like.
All right.
Yes, well, I would say that. For those who just arrived, just to repeat, we are recording the event, but the camera's only pointing at the front of the room, which is my laptop. Welcome everybody. This is the UCU Hustings for the General Secretary. We've got 2 of 3 candidates with us today. Unfortunately, Matt Waddup can't make it due to childcare issues. So, to my left is McNeill from the University of Liverpool and Grady from the University of Sheffield. I'm not going to prejudice the opening remarks by saying anything more than that. I'll allow you the candidates to introduce themselves. I can ask candidates to speak about 5 to 10 minutes each, and then we'll have the rest of the time for questions and discussion. So, by agreement, Joe Grady is going to speak first. So, over to you, Joe.
Thank you, and thank you for all taking some time out in what I know is a busy period. My name is Joe Grady. I'm a senior lecturer in employment relations at the University of Sheffield, and I'm running basically as General Secretary candidate because I think that we need to change what we do as a union. I think for too long, the National Union has been quite disconnected, not just from what we do in branches, but what we do in our nations. And you may feel that up here in Scotland and in our regions as well. And part of this manifesto, I've dotted a few around, but far more people have come in now, and I've got more with me. So if you want one, you can take one away with you to read it, in case you suffer from insomnia or just really like reading manifestos. And it really covers all sectors of our union. And I've written lots of supplementary blogs as well, because if you've ever written anything like this, it's actually quite a craft to try and draw things together and really outline how they fit, and you can't include everything. So there's on my website there's quite a lot of supplementary blogs that expand on points that I gesture towards in here. But the reason why I'm standing, and the reason why actually, regardless of what happens in this election, I'm really glad that I put this together, because I was on the NEC, is I think there's a lot of current challenges that we need to face, and that might just sound like an obvious thing to say, but not just challenges we need to face, but the challenges that we all the time preempt because we live and work this sector and we know what is happening. Our union needs to do that as well, and I think we've had a real disconnect between our ability on the ground to know what's coming, to see how various metrics are being used for performance management, to spot patterns emerging, and our union's ability to really respond to them. So I think there's a benefit and an opportunity here to really elect somebody who's been experiencing these things closely. And somebody who's been on the receiving end, as many of us will have been, of actually what I call in my campaign materials the managed decline of our terms and conditions. The incremental approach that we just have to tolerate things getting progressively worse, and that we don't have the courage or the vision to actually stand up and take a fight against those things. So, for those of us who've been here for the long haul, we saw our USS final salary disappear. We saw that downgraded since sort of 2012, and at the minute, and I'm happy to, people want to ask questions about USS, given that it's topical because there was an announcement last week, to answer more questions on that. But it looks at the moment, if we don't take decisive action, that there'll be further downgrading of USS in the future. We know that our workloads have increased. They've not just increased because that's tended to be the direction of traffic. They've decreased because we've lost colleagues who haven't been replaced, and we have to pick up their work. Our pay has gone down by 16%. Casualisation has exploded as a trend, and the morale and mental well-being of our colleagues has also deteriorated. And we know these problems. We know them because they're the sector that we live in and we work in. And I think that, if you are, and this is amazing, the more and more people that piled in as we started, it's clearly, a really active branch. We know that these are the problems that we face. And sometimes if you're a really strong and a successful branch, you don't always need that help so much from UCU. But not every branch has the benefit of having this many people. So some branches really need that support and rarely get it. And then other branches that are really strong and mobilised often ask for additional support when they need it, and again, don't get it. And this has really sort of been based on my experience, not just at the University of Sheffield where I am now, but where I was before at Leicester. You run lots of successful campaigns. We ran campaigns against lecture capture. We ended up formulating one of the most progressive, I think, forms of lecture capture policy, where you had to opt in, which was quite a difference from what the university wanted to run. I think that the stuff that I've learned along the way, whether it was dealing with lecture capture there, or redundancies there, or at Sheffield now working with the university on the University Evaluation Working Group, and with the president there, Sam Marsh, we have what I consider to be one of the most well-functioning negotiating bodies with our employer, where we're setting really kind of open-minded, if you like, policy that we're hoping other universities will follow. And I think that what happened last year, for those of us that took part in the USS strike, it really demonstrated the strength that we have when we use the expertise of our members, because we understand our problems better than anyone else. If I think about Scotland, I was reading the document that was produced by UCU Scotland on the way up here about principal pay and the sort of never-ending lust for greed that seems to have. It seemed even worse than some of the VC pay down in England. I looked at Edinburgh, not that we're playing bingo here, but in the last 10 years, well, from 2007 to 2017, how much did your principal pay increase by? 33.75, yes, well done. So they're on like 321,000.
That's a massive increase since then.
Wow, yeah, okay. All the extra bits. Yeah, and I think that, these issues, they sort of tend to go, they experience by us in branches and form part of what we know. And the funding cuts that obviously have happened alongside that in Scotland, and the extent to which, that you're getting less now than you were in 2014. So I think that one of the points that I'm sort of making along the way in the campaign really is that bringing these issues to the fore, enabling people to organise where they're organising well, and helping branches to campaign better on issues that are affecting them. But then in addition to that, actually taking hold of some issues that affect us all and really pushing on those issues. So two of the things that I mentioned here are casualisation and the hostile environment. I talk quite significantly about the extent to which casualisation is often being discussed as a peripheral issue in our union, but we know it's not. We know that casualisation rates run at across 50% in HE, but they're also high in FE as well. A lot of the time, and we actually just had this conversation in the previous hosting that we had at Harriet, there's been this kind of idea that casualisation is a rite of passage, and that eventually, you will get the permanent contract, and that isn't happening either. You have people on casualised contracts for 10 years. I know from someone who was speaking at the last hosting, Edinburgh is one of the worst offenders of keeping people on hourly paid contracts. This is an issue that we really need to address. I talk about ways in which we can address it in the manifesto. I think actually having much more progressive subscription rates for casualised members of staff is a good idea, and being able to have a monthly approach to subscription rates for people to salary changes, to actually bring people in and keep them in the union, because we know that, at Sheffield, we managed to get above the threshold for the latest pay ballots. But we know that people really wanted to take strike action over casualisation and over equalities issues. So part of what I'm wanting to do is make some of the issues that we know on the ground, the lived issues that we have, far more central, not only in our campaigning and what we do and making our union more a political union, but also in our actual pay claims to lift up members. Because some people talk about casualisation as if it is that peripheral issue, but it's trickling up. And we're digging the graves of our own profession if we don't deal with it, not just because it's a stain and we should be dealing with it, but because it's also a long-term challenge that we need to address. So there's so many other things I could cover, but I'm going to leave it there because I think answering your question is important. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And over to you, Joe.
Right, I'm going to try and keep my introduction brief so that we can get to questions. Okay, my name is Joe McNeill. I'm president of the University of Liverpool's UCU branch. I'm also on the NEC. I've been president of the branch for 5 years, and I've been on the NEC for 5 years, and I've been a national negotiator for 2 years. We've got a really big, active branch in Liverpool. People may know our Vice Chancellor, Jan Clear. She's the president of UUK, but that's our day-to-day. We work with her on a daily basis. But despite that, we've got a very active and a very good, very strong branch. In my first year as president, we had 3,000 members of staff placed on a Section 188, which means 3,000 members of staff's jobs were at risk. They wanted to do was sack us all on a Friday and reinstate us all on the following Monday on inferior terms and conditions. So I stepped up, mobilised the branch, got everybody together, took it out to our sister unions, took it outside to the wider trade union movement, took our members to the ballot. This is way before the anti-trade union legislation came into being, and we got over 50%. We had 9 months of intensive negotiations. The minute we got that ballot result, everything changed. The leverage that we had in that room with that employer changed completely because they knew that the membership were mobilised behind us, and we won. We didn't lose any of our terms and conditions, and we didn't have to take a single day of strike action. It was down to that level of activity and mobilisation that they could see. That created a fear within the management, and that's something that's been lacking with UCU. Our employers haven't feared us for a long time. That changed a little bit around USS. They didn't expect us to have the effect that we had with the USS strikes. I know one of the senior officials came to our branch on the second day of action, and he said, we had really well organised, pickets. We'd organised our pickets for every single day. We knew we'd done surveys. We knew who was coming in at what times. We've got like some compliments. And he said to me, have you got this level of organisation for all 5 days? Because he meant the Thursday, Friday the first week and the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday the second week. And I said, no, I've got this level of organisation for all 14 days. The hierarchy in this union, the leadership expected us to cave after 5 days. And I played a very central role in that USS strike because people will remember in the past, UCU did not have effective industrial action strategies. And this isn't the first General Secretary election I've ran in. I ran against Sally Hunt 2 years ago, when there were very few people lifting their heads above the parapet to challenge the management, challenge the leadership. I stood and stood against Sally Hunt. And when we did that, I challenged an industrial action strategy repeatedly throughout that campaign. And when we came to the next Congress after that, Sally introduced the idea of a commission for effective industrial action based on the fact that I've been challenging these industrial action strategies. When she dropped this commission into her speech, it wasn't the way we would expect a democratic commission to start. So I put an emergency motion to Congress to say, whoever is on that commission, it should be democratised. We should all have an opportunity to stand for the positions. Sally spoke to me separately and said she wanted me to drop the motion, and I refused. I took the motion to the floor and the motion carried. That meant we could democratise that entire commission. What I did then, I organised nationally within every single region to make sure that left activists stood for those positions, and we won every position except one. It was that Commission for Effective Industrial Action where 14 days of strike action came from. We've never seen anything like that before in UCU. We've had 2-hour strikes, we've had tokenistic strikes, we've had strikes in the middle of summer. It was that commission and those left activists who brought that 14 days of impactful, effective strike action. And Sally only signed it off on the dotted line because she thought UCU left and the left activists around the country would cave under the pressure of organising 14 days of strike action. And it absolutely wasn't the case. It woke members up, it brought members to the fore, and we saw mobilisation and activity like we've never ever seen before. And we need UCU now, we need an absolute overhaul, because what we've had since then, we've had 2 pay ballots which we haven't been able to get the strike threshold for, we haven't been able to meet the Tory threshold. And we know why that is. That's because, we asked repeatedly for casualisation and equalities and workload to be at the centre of the campaign. I mean, our national head of campaigns is running in this election with me and Deb, and we're just seeing what's coming out of the jet, and the fact that, we are going to have to go to the ballot again over USS. Where is the national campaign? We can't go to a ballot and expect to get the 50% threshold unless we've had a high-profile national campaign first. And once again, we can all see it coming. Why can't our national campaigns team see it coming? Why isn't our national campaigns team stepping up right now and starting to mobilise this membership? The only way we're going to make any difference in UCU is facing an absolute onslaught. The environment is completely, attacking us from every direction. The neoliberal agenda isn't working. Marketisation isn't working of this sector. The only way we're going to be in a position to fight is if we build from the grassroots up, and that's my plan. I mean, we've got some good structures, some self-organised structures within UCU that we can work within, that members can get involved in, but we need to get out and build that membership, because we've got no leverage whatsoever unless we can get out to the people, and we can make sure that when members do speak, we listen to them. Because what we saw last year was we had meetings in Liverpool. We had 350 people in a meeting in Liverpool saying we want to revise and resubmit, and those voices were just not listened to. So that's why I'm standing as General Secretary. We need a complete change in this union.
Thanks, Julie. So now it's time to two questions. Well, actually two related ones, and the first one topic the point you both made about the transformative nature of USS. Right, it sounded very transformative within Edinburgh. I don't think that number in the room today isn't going to be that much here. So the first part of the question is, what do you see as the next step for dealing with the unresolved issue of USS? And the second part of that, I want to refer back to last year's Congress. And the USS was obviously at the root of the dispute that arose between delegates to Congress and Sally Hunt. So the question from that is, what do you see the role of General Secretary being in a situation like that, and how would you have done it differently? That's not the question.
There's a number of things that I think as an incoming Gen Sec you would see I would do differently, and negotiation would be one of them. In the manifesto I talk about the power and importance of open negotiations, and the idea that we could look into trialling them. So open negotiations, couldn't be more different to what we saw last year, when none of us had a clue what was going on until sort of rumours and documents trickled out, and then we were kind of asked to make snap decisions. So the first of those was that ACAS deal, which led to no capitulation, a very kind of jubilant moment for lots of people, where you really felt that you had an impact in the democracy of your union. And the second one was kind of gesturing towards the ballot that ended up causing the Congress mess. Open negotiations are really important, in my opinion. They keep your negotiators accountable, but they also keep employers more accountable, because both people have to show what they're doing. And you also know that as a Gen Sec that you are pushing as hard as possible for your members. So in that discussion that led up to the ballot, and I was one of those key people. I set up USS briefs because we didn't agree with the information that we were being. As someone who researches pensions, alongside Sam Marsh at Sheffield, we had a different understanding of what we were being told. We were taking a much more kind of political perspective of what was happening. So for me, all of the effort that people like me and Sam and USS Breeze people put in almost wouldn't have been necessary if we'd have had a more open, transparent and accountable negotiation procedure, because it would have been evident to everybody rather than people having to do it. The ballot procedure itself, because we hadn't been given the option of a revise and resubmit, which many of us wanted, and because there was no transparency about how that decision was met either, we ended up with a ballot that was a binary, but we know amongst the membership it was a lot more complicated than that. Again, something that I ran was a key part of my campaign when I ran for NEC, is that NEC votes will be transparent, that minutes where possible will be published, that voting records will be published. So the catastrophic NEC that led to the ballot and not an R&R, we would at least be clear if it had been, we definitely wanted a ballot, that we know that was the case. So, sorry I'm taking some time, but at every point I think a more transparent and accountable negotiation process, a transparent and accountable NEC would have at least meant that people would have felt more comfortable about the ballot dropping if that had still happened. With regarding the ballot itself, I think it's really important that actually the GenSec doesn't just have a monopoly on communication. And again, as a member, that was one of the things that really frustrated me, that there wasn't any other alternative voice. And I think one of the reasons we're in a bit of a problem now with what's happening with USS is actually any critique of that ballot was stifled. And the problem that we've got now is that we've already passed no detriment because our contribution increases went up in April. We're looking at further contribution increases in October and even more expensive ones next April. And many members aren't aware of this because our union has been honest about actually what the consequences of that ballot deal were. And we always knew that these contribution increases were going to go up. So in terms of what I would do, I just don't think we would have ever got to the point where Congress would actually have led to what happened last year, because there would have been accountability along the line, there would have been chances for other voices to feed in, and if I ever was in a position where people wanted to, felt it necessary to hold me accountable to either censure or a no confidence motion at Congress, you would face it down. You were accountable to the people who elected you, you know, and you wouldn't orchestrate or take part in some form of walkout. So that's kind of part of that. There was a second part to your question. Next steps. Well, so I'm on the National Dispute Committee. We have been, I would say, subject to bottlenecks at various times when we have been trying to get, whether it's a motion to NEC to call for, to put not only a timetable in place for a ballot, but to start producing campaign materials on on National Dispute Committee. I would suggest that we're probably some of the most informed people about USS. You know, we've almost freakishly spent our last 12 months or longer studying it. We have been asking for funds, for time, for space to make videos, talking heads to educate people, and it's not happening. So I think, you know, and I'm sure Joe would agree, and if we were elected GenSec, that would almost be a #1 priority really with regard to USS. I'll stop there because I've talked for quite a long time.
Yeah, and I completely agree with Jo, and she's right about the bottlenecks. Once you get to NEC, there is a very, you know, there's a very organised right on NEC, and they, you know, this whole culture in UCU at the moment of sort of handling, keep a lid on memberships, on the membership, as opposed to harness the energy and build on that, is one of the major problems right now. And when it comes to USS, like I just said in the introduction, whoever wins this GenSec election has got to hit the ground running, because it's not being done. We're not. There's this sort of, you know, big chasm of nothing that's coming from the centre right now. I mean, we're at the moment that there's a lobby of the USS headquarters because there's a JNC on Friday morning, which I'll be at, and I know Joe would have been at, but she's travelling from Newcastle. But you know, so we're trying to get people who are in and around London to get inside, so that we can start raising the profile of this. That this is, you know, this is coming back down the line again. We are going to be balloting that. There is no question about that. You know, we do need a timetable in place. So at the National Dispute Committee putting an emergency motion to Congress, I'll be signing that emergency motion, as our, you know, our branch will be supporting that. We have got, and once again, National UCU are not taking what we need forward, and it's coming from us, it's coming from the membership, it's coming from the grassroots. So that's what, you know, that's what we've got to do. On transparency and like sort of accountability around, you know, the democracy of this union. I mean, I've never seen anything like Congress last year. You know, it was just outstanding to see, unbelievable to see our General Secretary and all of our paid officials walk out of our most democratic forum. And one of the things that, you know, I've agreed to, and it as well, is that there's a report coming out of the Democracy Commission, which is making recommendations to change the General Secretary's contract to shorten its term and to introduce a recall clause. Both Joe and I have agreed to accept all recommendations from that report immediately. Matt Waddup told us yesterday on Leicester he's not accepting the recommendations. So if Matt does get in, he'll be in for 5 years, and there will be no recall option in his contract at all. So if we want a democratic union and we don't want to see repeats of what happened last year, you as the membership have got to be able to have an opinion on what anyone in the leadership is doing, and you've got to have an opportunity to get rid of anyone at any point. That's how democracy has got to work, and I'm all for that. And so I know you are as well.
Thanks. Who would like to ask the next question?
Don't be shy.
I'm up here.
Fantastic. I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about what you felt about the last balance we had with previous week. So why the policy in that position, what rules were balanced, and what you think, what lessons you think we could learn from that process. That particular previous week we had recently.
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
I think, and I mentioned it again earlier, I think the biggest problem, the biggest mistake we made was that we made pay the sort of main issue in the campaign. Had we made the main issue casualisation, and workload, a lot more members would have voted in that ballot. I think there was a couple of other problems that we encountered. One, and in an ideal world, I'm all for aggregated ballots, but in this current environment, having to get over that 50% threshold, an aggregated ballot is a little bit unachievable. So what we need is, and my manifesto is online at Joe McNeill number 4 gensec.com, so you can have a read of that there. But my industrial action strategy is reflecting the FE industrial action strategy at the moment. We're getting lots of wins, sort of small wins locally, and what they're doing is they're disaggregating ballots. The branches that do get over the threshold, they're coming out and taking strike action, and we're seeing wins. And then there's resource going into the other branches that just missed and helping them get over the threshold. So we kind of build up the action in waves, and that's what we need to do to get the pressure to build up again. If somebody said yesterday in Leicester, it's like lighting 1,000 fires to build activity, and that's a really good analogy. That's what we need to do, but we need to affect wins. I do think we can win on pay, and as a trade union, if we can't win on pay, then we've got a major problem. So we've got to fix that.
So for me, I think part of the answer that I will give is based on my branch activity, and then part of it sort of based on what I think is a strategic objective to tackle the problem. So we were one of the 7 branches on the first pay ballot that did hit threshold. And we think we hit on the second, but obviously it was aggregated, so you can't know for certain. And the sort of endless meetings we had with departmental reps about the issues were that people just felt in a city like Sheffield, and I'm sure this can be the same story elsewhere, that they would find it very difficult standing on a picket line explaining to a nurse or a school teacher or someone like that why they were striking if they had to sort of reveal how much they were paid compared to other people who have really, really suffered the sharp end of austerity. That's not to say that we deserve a pay rise, but if you can convince members to vote because they feel compromised being on a picket line about that, then you need to start thinking, well, pay is important, but what else is important to these people, to our members? And at Sheffield, the answer was, well, we see equalities in the pay claim and we see casualisation is there, but there's no real guarantees as to what we're going to do. And there wasn't. And I think that this is the problem, that these things go into the pay claim, but they're so peripheral and they're not used in the campaigning material. So we managed, I think, to sort of convince people to take a leap of faith in Sheffield because we campaigned very hard locally on those issues. But nationally, that campaign is just not there. So I hold out hope that actually we can do that, because in Wales recently in FE, they had an aggregated ballot, they bust the threshold and they actually got what they needed without even going on strike in the end. But if you look at those pay claims, so the campaigning is a massive problem, because pay claims can have lots of great stuff in them, but if the campaigning isn't there, you're not going to be able to convince people on the ground. But the pay claims are quite lightweight. And apologies to Jo because she's heard this before, but if you look at them, the language in them is really non-committal. It's things like, well, we'll transfer more hourly paid, we'll commit to ending things, you know, we'll agree strategies and timescales. And as an industrial relations scholar, I'm like, well, does that pass the chance test on a picket line? If you think about the chance test, you know, what do we want? A commitment for strategies, action plans, we should ask for action. It's like, Whereas if you think, well, what do we want? And there's a motion going to Congress this year, we want 2-year contracts. When do we want them? We want them now. And I think that, you know, until we start having claims that have these very tangible, achievable things in, you know, your prof who doesn't want to stand on a picket line and explain why he's there or she's there is always going to be an ongoing problem. So I think for me, we really need, and this is why I centre casualisation and other issues quite firmly in my manifesto, because pay is important, of course it's important. And one of the other things we said in Sheffield is, you look at the decline of our pay in 10 years, it's going to decline even further. So you have to do it for future generations, and you have to do it to stop this profession being something that you can afford to work in rather than is open to everybody. And I think that that's why we need to be more campaigning and more political and really take issues in our paper.
I think the more members we have, the greater leverage we've got with the employers. Like, well, I know that from the time when I used to work for University of Scotland, it's a fact that the more members we have, the more retention the employers will pay to us. I think sometimes trade unions miss a trick in selling themselves to the members and, you know, explaining to them what solidarity is about and what benefits we give to you members, not just expecting people to do it as a part of a political belief system, but also because it's in their interest. What would you do to increase the membership?
I'll go first. Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the things, again, it sounds like I'm just talking about casualisation, but I really do think that progressive subscriptions is a big part of that. I think if you literally can't afford to join the union, you know, or if you're a casualised person and you're moving around a lot, when my partner, when I was 10 years ago when I started as a lecturer, my partner didn't really have a job for 2 years. He picked up part-time bits here, there, and everywhere. At one point, I think he was a member of 3 different, or could have been a member of 3 different UCU branches. What I pay now are less than I paid when I first started, because Sheffield doesn't have a local levy, and I am paid far more now than when I first started. So I think the subscription rates that we have need to be rapidly addressed, because at the minute they're aggressive and they need to be progressive. So I think that's an issue, and I think people, because there's still this kind of legacy in the union that casualised work is a rite of passage. You know, at previous hustings, Matt Waddup has said, oh, but we introduced free fees for PGR students. Like, you can be casualised for 15 or 20 years. Like, free fees for PGRs doesn't solve the issue of rates being unaffordable for you. So I think that's an issue. In terms of solidarity and showing people what they get, I actually thought about this quite a lot. There's a lot of members, kind of, you know, the lay kind of silent majority that don't come along to meetings like this, who, who's maybe their membership is an insurance card. We do so much amazing casework. There is so much that happens that members never hear about. And I really think that within nations and regions, actually publicising what has been done more and the gains that have been made with the money that you spend actually is a real firm way of, okay, you might never need the union over the course of your career. But finding out that the union has made a landmark case on parental leave or on casualisation or been campaigning on the hostile environment, I think that's something that really breeds solidarity.
I think activity breeds membership. That's one of the main things. We look at the USS dispute last year, thousands of people flocked to this union. Just last week, Lambeth College had a really good win. They won like a 3% pay raise. I think if we got that in Haiti, you know, we totally cartwheeling, but you know, they're getting these little wins everywhere. Their membership went up by 20% in like a 2-week period. So activity definitely brings members forward. But one of the other things we need to do, which I spoke about this in my last GenSec campaign a couple of years ago, we're an education union, yet we don't provide any trade union education to people. And like we've just been speaking to people in Heriot Watt about some of the cultural differences that, you know, different from people from different countries around the world. Their understandings of trade unionism, and some places are really sort of unionised and some places are absolutely, you know, not at all. And we reflect that diversity within our staff, and we've got to recognise that and make sure that people understand that everyone can be part of UCU. And we do very, very little proactive work around, you know, just advertising ourselves as what the union is, and you know what we can do for people. And you know, but I think the main core of bringing a membership forward is activity and winning. It's not, you know, it's showing members that we can win on issues that are important to them. And if you're fighting for something that's important to people, you know, Joe's mentioned casualisation and workload, things like that. If you're fighting about those key issues, then people will come along and join.
Yeah, so I was going to ask about the union's position, or what it will be doing with respect to the hostile environment. It's an amplifier on a lot of things that we're talking about. So we're talking about pay and the skyrocketing costs of immigration costs, thousands and thousands of pounds. And also in terms of precarity, you know, even people on open-ended contracts feeling uncertain about what kind of actions they can take or what kinds of things they can say because their right to remain in the country is dependent on their employer. And then there's also the issues of the kind of surveillance that we are under, and also the kind of surveillance we are tasked with carrying out on our students. So I'm wondering what kind of actions you think the union could take. And if I can also add, my understanding is that there's a motion from the Congress for there to be a migrant representative on the NEC, I believe, and would you be supportive of that?
Yeah, I mean, Joe and I have both already committed to supporting that motion that's coming from Leeds. We're in touch with the people from Leeds as well who have been forward and happy, you know, speaking forward and absolutely support it and urging everybody we know to support it. Hostile environment's a massive issue. It's one of our highest priorities that we've got to deal with, you know, as whoever wins this election. I think the point about having a forum for migrant traders, which is what Leeds are bringing forward, that's just been missing in UCU for a long time. There's been no space for us to get the information that we need from migrant workers at that national level. And also at a branch level, there's not really a space on committees for a migrant representative at any point. And as far as the hostile environment and the monitoring of staff and students is concerned, in Liverpool, we've just, in the last sort of month or so, been at the point of dispute with our management because our members were asked to monitor students' attendance at every single lecture. You know, we've got the sort of broader expectations, but then we've got institutional level expectations which go far beyond anything the Home Office are interested in. And you know, our employer is, as I say, quite ruthless at the best of times. So with that, you know, they've been pushed forward. So our staff sort of set up a campaign where they started wearing T-shirts that said "Educators Not Boards of Police," and we were advertising that on our social media. And they pulled us in and said, you know, we can't have this campaign, it's too high profile and we need you to pull it back. And we said, then you need to stop asking our members then to monitor attendance, and we want them to only monitor absence, which covers welfare, because their argument was, we only want you to monitor attendance for welfare, but we said that's not necessary, that's going above and beyond. So, you know, but what we need from UCU is we need consistency. And again, we're not getting any advice from the centre to say, this is what every single institution should be asking for, this is what you should be negotiating for, and this is what you should be tying in. And we're not getting that. We're doing it ad hoc at a branch level. So we need consistency. Yeah, I'll let you speak.
I mean, I think anyone who's paid any attention to my campaign, it's been quite central. It's one of the first issues that I chose to write about. I think beyond the just kind of xenophobia that has been increasing in the UK since the EU referendum, it's been, you know, we talk about UCU as an education union, and we have missed an absolute trick to be an education union about this issue with a national voice. It's really shameful that it took UCU so long to have that consultation, that it had it during the summer when so many people are away, for various reasons, or just not checking their inbox. But then when it gave an overwhelming mandate to actually be part of a campaign for some form of second vote, there was a flurry of press releases and nothing. I study industrial. There are other unions that are far more split in terms of their membership, across the sort of 48, 52, who have said, no, this is an issue and we are going to be part of that conversation. And I think the fact that we haven't is pretty shameful. I think there's still plenty of time to actually get involved, because I think trade unions, if we want to push that national conversation along and we want to try and make leverage with political parties, then we have to stand up to be heard. So that's kind of point one, if you like, that there's so much more we could do. And there are pressure groups within our communities, such as International and Broke, Uni Resist Borders, which have tried working with UCU, which have tried pushing these issues and fallen on deaf ears. Whenever I've been involved in campaigns, a PhD student who was at Sheffield due to a UK, due to some sort of cock-up with documents, ended up being put in a detention centre. It was the local UCU branch that got together, did a crowdfunder, did events. Obviously the trauma of it and something like that stays with you forever, but it was the sanctuary in the union that sort of stepped forward. And I think, that idea that the university is no longer a sanctuary, not just for sort of staff who are subject to, really hostile and aggressive right to work checks, but for our students. And that this has pedagogical issues, so PhD students having to fill in feedback forms immediately after supervisions, let alone the anxiety of all of this stuff. In terms of what we could specifically do, in addition to being part of much more forthright campaigns about how important freedom of movement is, about tackling false claims about migrants and how they push down wages and all of that rubbish, because we produce research that demonstrates that it is. There are just things that we could do. We could, for example, I'm talking about pay claims, we could write into pay claims reimbursing international staff for the absolutely extortionate fees they have to pay, with visa fees, NHS surcharge. We could make, at the minute our employers often will talk about, we are international, I think is the hashtag of the University of Birmingham, who really enforce much more aggressively than they need to a lot of the border agency checks. We can say, well, if you're international, why don't you stump up the cash for all these international staff that you love so much? We could be much more forthright about this, because it is shocking, and it's also an equalities issue, because that's part of the demographic of what we're looking at with our staff and members that are most affected by the hostile environment. So I just think that there's so much more that we could do, and really must do.
Can I just add there quickly that we've got national policy to dissent from prevent of the actual national policy of UCU, and we should always remember that when we're in negotiations at a local level.
We're educators, we're librarians, we're technicians, not UKBA enforcement agency.
I've got that here.
I think to pick up on something very encouraging my question, can I direct it to Grady first? Then he would be able to say. I have a Twitter account, which I don't use to tweet, but I use it to keep up with various current affairs. My first started following you during this time, and it's hugely encouraging and helpful to be able to read your posts on the progress of the strike and your analysis of what's going on. And then I discovered for about a year that you haven't looked, because among the other accounts I've followed for information are accounts which get picked up by the Twitter block list, which is called Turtle.
Yeah.
I know you're not using that now, but having had that experience, I'd like to ask how confident I can be that you will be, as president, able to engage with and represent the views of members who maybe don't align with exactly in all areas of policy and paper. And the related question is that, we may be in a situation where we're going to be out on strike again in the near future. How easy is it going to be to mobilise membership, a significant portion of which you have by these personal checks, who said that he's unengageable with, unlistenable to, and unable to be
So I think first thing I would say for anybody who uses social media, especially something like Twitter, if there is an instance where you become the target of a lot of harassment, it can often be very good for your own mental well-being to take whatever steps necessary to actually filter that harassment out of your timeline. Nobody is mandated to be on Twitter, and nobody, I don't think, has a right to harass anybody. So that was the circumstances with which I chose to use Turf Blocker at the time. And I chose to uninstall it because I was no longer receiving harassment. I think with regards trans exclusionary radical feminism, I find it very difficult to engage with a philosophy that positions the rights of trans people as not important or as not worthy of autonomy. Our union has a motion that was passed at Congress last year that was very firm about how it stood on the Gender Recognition Act. And I think as GenSec, representing Congress is important.
I think as General Secretary, we've got to have open and honest debate. I think that's one of the main things we've got to have. I don't agree with, and I'm not saying that you did anything at all. I don't know who you are. Okay. Okay. So I just think that, as and I know that there's been a lot of debate about platform and things like that. So I think that any sort of group of people who are making another group of people feel discriminated against or unwelcome or can't speak, I don't agree with that. But I think I personally wouldn't have blocked people's sort of accounts in the past because I've never done that. But I think everybody's got to be able to have a debate, I suppose. But I don't think that. I think we've been discussing about things like academic freedom, and I don't think academic freedom should be used as a veil to hide sort of discrimination against any particular group. So any particular group that's being attacked, I don't agree with that. I don't think we should be, hiding bullying or discrimination in any way. But I do think we've got to have the opportunity to be able to hear everybody's positions.
So contract researchers, postdocs, historically not been very well served by UCU. Like 30,000 of this in the Russell Group alone is quite a lot of recruitment. So how would you solve that problem? So what does the solution look like to you? And how would you get there?
Okay, I mean, I think it's always been a difficult group to recruit from because, well, in the past, in our branch we've got quite a few contract researchers in our membership, but it's always been quite difficult because it's difficult to kind of door knock and find people because people are mostly casualised and are not around. So I think making sure that there's we're making things available that are specifically attractive to contract researchers has got to be key, and I think we've got to be open to bringing everybody in. We've got to treat you equally to every other member within the branch. I mean, I'm an academic related member of staff. We're another group that are left out in the cold and feel like the poor relations to the academic staff in UCU. So we're not alone as a group that are not recruited from and not seen as kind of one of the core members. So it's the same as it's do for academic relators. We talk to members from your group and find out what it is you want UCU to do for you and move forward. Sorry? Yeah.
I think it does come back to this idea of what we put in our curriculums and how we actually try and shape how the sector grows and the extent to which it actually makes career paths for people and doesn't just keep them on contracts. But I think in addition to that, one of the issues that's come up a lot during this campaign is the extent to which traditionally the only kind of industrial action that UCU takes. Obviously, when we go on strike, the expectation is that everybody comes out on strike. But if you're a kind of contract researcher and you're not around a lot, you know, and I know that not everybody does. But in addition to that, the things then that we've tended to do have been marking boycotts, which can be incredibly effective, but actually only call upon a very small amount of people to be involved in that activity. So actually, it excludes lots of people. And I also think that just as marking boycotts can be very, very effective after some strike action, so could other types of activities. And we never engage in what those might be. And that might be actually a way to include people who are just excluded because we never give them consideration. So I think that that's something. And one of the main ways in which I talk about building the union in here is, so we have our national committees that address various different issues. But I think that there's lots of space for people who would like to be more involved in the union, but either can't stand for election to those committees or for whatever reason are unable to. And I think that, you know, kind of agile, time focused task groups that could actually say, well, we're going to look at your kind of group of members and say, what more could we do? And actually, how more could we use you? So I think that genuinely engaging with those communities, and then in addition to thinking how they could be mobilized more or differently when we do take action.
I just want to point out from the answer to the question, which is on Grady talked about freedom of expression in relation to sex and gender, and the Grady talked about the existing constitution of GRA. And what I think I'm wondering is, do you and would you as a secretary welcome freedom to discuss a range of views on sex and gender? Obviously not those that are out in perspectives that, for instance, question the effect of sex-based rights on the change of terms, or would you only support and protect freedom of speech if it was generally supportive of the proposed GRA changes?
So, do you want to go first? As academics, or just as people, but particularly as academics, if you think about it, freedom of academic freedom means you can say what you want. Like, that's academic freedom. But with the invitation is that people can disagree with you. You know, that's part of being an academic. If people vehemently disagree with you, they can choose to uninvite you to an event. That's part of academic freedom. I support academic freedom. Our union has big problems with academic freedom. The USS dispute demonstrated that people who criticised their employer were hauled in. People who had anonymous accounts at certain universities who were discovered to have them faced disciplinary procedures. UCU has submitted to UNESCO this year a document about academic freedom, saying that we should have the right to criticise our employer and the right to fully participate in our institution. So I fully believe in academic freedom, but as academics, we have to accept that people are going to disagree with us and that there's consequences if people don't want to hear our views.
And I think it's, you know, it's similar to the debate of, you know, having platforms for the far right, isn't it? I mean, I don't think we should have, you know, a position where we allow anybody to come and speak who can, as I said earlier, who can make, you know, a certain group of people feel discriminated against. And I do think that we've got to be aware that there's, you know, we can't allow transphobia to be in UCU. I think that's something I appreciate. We do need to have a debate. We need to have a debate at Congress this year, and I know that there's a motion coming from Edinburgh to discuss that, you know, and have that debate openly. And I'm all for having that debate openly at Congress this year. But I don't think there's any room for transphobia. So let's have the debate and see what comes out in Congress.
Yeah, Mike.
Okay, that's an interesting answer, and I'm interested in this juncture between saying we could have a debate in Congress, but we can't have that debate in person.
Okay, now we should have the debate. If we want the whole Hustings, is that what you mean? Have the debate now, or what changes? It's an extremely sensitive situation at the moment, isn't it? I mean, it's you know, there are an awful there's a group of people that are feeling really sort of discriminated against by some of the positions that are being taken. So, okay, yeah, okay. I mean that's fair. That's fair enough. And we have got to get this out in the open at some point and discuss it. So, you know, I mean, it's just it's like Joe just said about academic freedom. You've got to be able to be disagreed. So, you know, have the debate, but we need to come to a position at some point centrally in UCU as to where we stand. And that's what I'm saying, as far as UCU policy is concerned, that debate is going to be had at Congress. And that it's Congress that sets UCU policy. And that's why I'm saying let's go and have the debate at Congress. I mean, by all means, have a debate here as well, but that's entirely up to you and branch at a local level. But, you know, you're asking us as Gen Sec candidates, we'd have to abide by national UCU policy, which goes from Congress.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sort of more comment, but also a question. So, because there's a lot of talk about the idea that representing all of our members, I have found personally that it concerns me sometimes the members that are because you just happen to be the ones who haven't the time to be on, I guess, social media and not to attend company meetings, and I consider myself a very active member as much as I can be, but I teach pretty much all the time, and I work like 6 hours at a time, the fact that I don't make it to any time, because, you know, no suggestion that I'm not engaged, you know what I mean, and somewhere I do a lot for my local members as far as I can. But one of the big things I struggle with industrial action when it's appropriate, but it makes it difficult for me as a teacher is that, you know, I don't work in an industry where I withdraw my labour and it's my boss's profits that suffer. I withdraw my labour and my students are going to not get away, and I'm very closely connected to my students and they rely upon me to do not only for their education but for their welfare. And I feel that this often come up in discussions about how we can, I suppose what I'm asking you is in terms of how can we support, following on to the question, how can we support researchers, how can you support teachers? I feel it doesn't feature very much in the story around industrial action. What would you do to help us as teachers with our students, or help us communicate with our students what we're doing, because we're the ones that have to face them down. And I spend most of my time breaking off the ceiling, and during that strike last year, they were under enormous amounts of stress, and just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. We wouldn't have got where we've got in the USS dispute if we wouldn't have brought the students on side with us. Right. And that's what we've got to push to work with the students nationally and locally all of the time. I mean, in Liverpool, I don't know what it was like in Edinburgh for whether the students were on board with the USS dispute. Yeah. The pay, and again, that's because of how the pay dispute was pitched. You know, had we talked about, I mean, I know when UCU made us about 2 years ago come out in the summer, we set a stall up in Liverpool at one of the open days, because it was an ineffective strike day anyway, so we just set a stall up at the open day, and then we set it all up around casualisation. Although it was a pay campaign, we just brought casualisation posters up and everything, and started telling parents of prospective students that, you know, our members are on, and nobody knew, nobody really had any idea, because this isn't really put out in the press. This isn't really sort of, you know, there's no narrative at all around how bad casualisation is, except for within UCU. We don't take that message out to the general public and to the students, but to bring the students on side and something like a pay dispute, if you were to say this is because your lecturers are like, you know, working a few hours a week in 3 different universities, you will be on side more so than you're saying, I'm quite well paid and now I want a little bit more and I'm going to withdraw my labour. But we can't be afraid, we can't shy away from industrial action, because industrial action is going to be at the core, you know, it's got to be at the core of every trade union anyway. But, you know, we've got to work to bring the students on board, to tell and explain at every level what we're doing is for their benefit. So actually, if they work with us, we're more likely to win more quickly. So it's having those conversations, not just with not just with your local UCU NUS branch, but also with the national NUS, and getting them to come on board, which it has been hot and cold, I think, and I'm not sure the relationship is as strong as it should be. Well, it's doing like what we do now. We go out and speak to the students. We make leaflets specifically pitched at the students. We talk to them. We go out and speak at their meetings. We try to get them to work through their democratic processes to support us. I mean, if you can't, it's harder. It is harder. I'm not denying that. But if we want this union, if we want to win on the issues that we're facing right now, it's brilliant to bring the students along. In an ideal world, we'd be bringing in England, United Unison, EIS in Scotland. We'd be bringing all of those sister unions along with us, and we'd have joint efforts in industrial action in an ideal world. And as General Secretary, I would be trying to build those relationships all of the time, not just at dispute time, all of the time. But ultimately, if we can't bring people on board, we can't shy away for that reason. But we've just got to, explain to students and to the staff, that sometimes you've got to cause, some distress at whatever level. There's got to be, the whole point in taking action is to make, a case for action, isn't it? We've got to be there and cause disruption. That's the centre of taking any form of action. So, if unfortunately we do our best to bring the students along with us, we do our best to bring our sister unions along with us. If we don't, we've got to make that choice then. Do we strike or don't we? And that's your decision at the point of the ballot. Whether you want to do that or not, you are given that opportunity at that point to see, is this something that's important to me? Whether bring students along or not. And obviously, from if I was then saying, I would be working all the time to bring them along. But is it important enough for you to take the action without that? Because sometimes I'm not going to mince words. At some point, we might have to do that.
I think for me, because I can completely feel what you were saying, I had to cancel pretty much 2/3 of all of the teaching I did in the semester during the USS strike. And I think actually the fact that we've never had a GenSec and we've never had people within that leadership who teach and who educate means that actually this idea that we would run a campaign aimed at our students to explain what was happening probably never occurred to them. One of the first things we said on the first meeting of the National Dispute Committee was, we need to get some page-sized adverts in newspapers explaining what's happened about USS, explaining the JEP said we were right, explaining that all those hours of teaching that was cancelled was not us and it was these people. So I think we could do much better in the aftermath of campaigns and strikes of actually conveying that, because my third years have all gone into the world now, and I want to get in touch with them and be like, I told you, because we told them. And so I feel what you feel, but I also think that in lots of branches we all ended up having to do our own emotional labour and then actual labour of explaining what was going on. And it could have been a really simple job for somebody to have put together a really effective campaign video that every seminar tutor, anyone who worked in we call it the student experience office in Sheffield, but it's basically the full-time office for the students. Something you could have shown to all of them that explained it, because often we carry as a source of shame the working conditions that we endure, and we don't want to have to tell them how rubbish it is. So actually to go through all of that and have to explain to them is emotional, and the idea that actually our union could save us the emotional burden and actually save us the time of putting it together by putting some really effective campaign materials that we could just introduce to our students, I think would be really helpful. And I think for any further dispute, we should be looking to do that. And then, as I say, some sort of bookend for afterwards about what happened.
It was past our final endpoint, but was waiting for one more. Just take this as one more, as final question that be brief.
Sorry, I was writing down. It's kind of much like there, Joe O'Neill about building relationships for the unions. So I just finished my PhD and started a sort of professional services role and sort of highlighted some of the division between academics and professional services, and especially people talking about the strikes last year and how much strain is put on a lot of administrators in particular, and talking to a lot of staff staff, how many of them are not in UCU or not in any of the unions as far as I'm aware. So I was wondering what your kind of thoughts are on building relationships and how we can do that
better. Yeah, I mean, as I say, I'm a member of academic related staff, and there was nothing that wound me up more after the role I played last year in the USS strike. Not just the role and the formative role at the beginning to get strike off the ground, but I run a branch. I was there sort of door knocking to get us over the 50%. I was setting up the picket, in advance, sending out surveys to make sure we had enough picketers for every day. I was out talking at Labour Party meetings. I was out talking at Trades Council meetings, student meetings. In the run up to all of the strike action, when the strike started, I opened the doors at 6 o'clock every morning because we had to deal with the communication workers union to not drop any posts off. So we were out early every day. I did all of that, and then the press come out, and it was the lecturers' strike, and I was like, oh, okay then. And I wasn't the only one. Most of our committee are academic related. There's a big split in this union, and the majority of the activists tend to come from the academic related group. But we are second, poor cousins to the academic staff, and we are not recognised as such. Communications are not aimed at us. Continuing professional development like UCU holds is nothing to do with us. It's all about grant writing, and there is no communication. So there is no wonder, same as the contract research, there is no wonder we are not there in our droves, represented in UCU, because we don't talk to those members at all. So I would be completely changing tack, and it's not even just academics and academic related. FE feel the same, adult continuing education feel the same, prison educators feel the same. I'm sure in the devolved nations, people feel the same. I've been over to Ulster last week. Joe was in Cardiff. I was there. I Skyped him. We're in Scotland today. We are not the most inclusive union. We've got to change that. We've got to have equality at the centre of what we do, and that equality has got to reach out to all of our members. So, I mean, a lot of the changes to sort of academics work. Matt keeps talking about the academic team. If you read my manifesto, I talk about the breakdown of the academic team, when the academic related members played a really important part in sort of workloads of academics, and we had our own kinds of roles to play within the academic team, but that's been dismantled quite a bit. We're the ones who suffer from restructures. We're the ones who suffer from grade drift when the roles are taken away, and yet there's framework agreements in place to protect us that national forget to train branches on, and some know about it and some don't. There's lots we can do to look after academic related and bring people in and bring other staff groups in as well. So I would definitely be doing that.
I think I would just add to that. One of the things that I really try and do in here is make the case that our union for far too long has had a very narrow focus at really people like me, people who never really had a kind of age of precarity. I've got a lecturing job and I've kind of moved through the grades, pay less subs now than I paid when I started at 25. I've never been on a grant writing course, and I don't think we should be offering them. I mean, if HR turned around to you and said, did you go on your university's grant writing or your union's grant writing course? If not, why not? This isn't the stuff we should be doing. We should be building our union in sectors that we've been ignoring. Much like I said this earlier, I wouldn't wait for the gender pay gap for 70 years for it to close. We shouldn't have to wait long enough for the union to start realising casualisation is an issue that's got to be addressed. We shouldn't have to wait that long for our union to realise that it's professional service and academic related staff that have really been at the receiving end of metrics, of managing our university by metrics, and actually encouraging academics to be even more kind of individualistic and often rude to professional service staff who are trying to help them out. And our union has such a role to play in broadening its remit of who it genuinely represents in campaigns, day to day, and in its pay claims. And that's why we're
Okay, thanks. On that note, so thanks to close. I'll just remind everybody there's links to all three candidates' websites on our branch websites. Matt asked me to get back to let you know that he's happy to field any questions by emails. I'm sure both Joes will do the same if there's anything else anybody wants to ask. So I just thank you all for coming, and I'm actually doing a thank you to the